If you guys have been watching some of the recent Hedera videos on the channel, then you already know that I have been watching this overall trend line to be retested yet again this week. We have been holding this trend line so far. Obviously, if we lose this trend, it's not going to be a pretty sight on this overall chart, and that's why we're really kind of focused on this. Now, initially, my main focus was always the highs going all the way back to like March of 2024. For those that know about March 2024, that's the prior run-up before we ran in like December all the way into like January for most old coins. March of 2024 was the initial push to the upside, and we recently tested this back in April and also back in June. This was basically our double bottom on the weekly view. So if we do lose this trend, we would be looking at this being retested. However, the big issue with that is the more that we do retest support or even resistance, it does become weaker, which means it could potentially break. Now, if we do break this, I know that you guys are probably going to say, what about the wick on October 10th? This was just a wick. We're talking about close below this, but if we do lose this low, then we would be looking at the next prior highs to be retested around like 9 cents. We do not want to see that but it is a possibility. That's why I have been focused on this trend line for so long, and I've been watching to see if these levels do hold. Now, just like I said in those videos, the main focus here is what Bitcoin wants to do, and if we are going to lose crucial support on this chart as well. The main thing and one of the most important things to really kind of focus on is the weekly candle close. For most of these charts, because on the weekly so far, we have been maintaining a trend line. And if we lose that trend on the weekly, then that could signal much deeper lows being retested, which would take, of course, HBAR back down below 10 cents yet again. Now, will that be a huge opportunity for us that want to buy? Sure it is, but it's also something that we don't really want to see. We want to see bullish structure. We want to see strong structure forms. So until that happens, we just need to be very cautious. Now, I do want to talk about a few things happening around Hedera. I have been looking at listings happening for Hedera for quite some time, and we just got a new one. Now again, it's not like a massive T1 exchange because Hedera is already listed on most of those exchanges. However, it is still a pretty decently sized exchange that's in a nice area as well. And that's of course coins.fetch. This is the #1 fiat and crypto e-wallet in the Philippines. And now Hedera is live on this platform. It could trade HBAR with PHP or USDT and enjoy deep liquidity right on Coins Pro. Now again, not a crazy massive exchange, but still a pretty large exchange, which we just like to see more exposure to HBAR realistically. So it doesn't really matter the size of the exchange, it's the fact that we are now starting to see even more expansions around the market side for Hedera. And you know, Hedera already has over 162 different pairs on multiple exchanges. So this is very good to see. And again, it's just another addition to the list of exchanges that already have HBAR listed. Now, beyond that, let's talk about DeFi because, you know, DeFi is probably one of the biggest things that crypto really focused on initially. I feel like DeFi has always been a huge selling point for anyone that's jumping into crypto initially. And it was ultimately the biggest selling point for crypto, you know, since inception. Everyone wants to be their own bank. Everyone wants to have control over their finances. And DeFi essentially allows us to, you know, kind of disconnect from the traditional world of finance that is, you know, 100% dominated by these big institutional players and middlemen. And, you know, again, DeFi allows us to, you know, take control of our own finances and also send and receive money at a fraction of a penny. So DeFi has always been a big focus of mine. And when it comes back to the DeFi side of things for Hedera, we know that the DeFi market has been expanding rapidly. And one of the big players that recently launched about roughly a year or so ago, I think it was like right around like October of 2024, was Bonzo Finance. Now, since then, Bonzo Finance has been building. They've been continuously expanding their platform and their new Bonzo Vault is coming soon. I'm very excited about this because again, Bonzo Finance isn't that small of a name anymore on Hedera. They do have about roughly $26 million tied to them. At one point in time, going back to July, they did have about roughly $58 million. Right now, it's kind of consolidating a little bit. We probably have this run up yet again once we start to see the retail flood come back. But you know, Bonzo Finance is a pretty solid platform. We've talked about them quite a bit on the channel ever since they did launch, and it's been a very successful protocol on the Hedera DeFi ecosystem. Now talking about the Hedera DeFi ecosystem, it's still pretty flat. Most DeFi protocols are right now, or I shouldn't say, you know, protocols, but ecosystems, if you will. I mean, even if we look at, for example, Ethereum, you know, Ethereum has about 75, almost $76 billion tied to it. We did hit a peak back in August and September. And since then, we've been kind of, you know, selling off most platforms, or I shouldn't say platforms, but most networks are in a very similar stage right now, where they are starting to see that significant downtrend from their recent highs. Some of them have never bounced back, like, for example, Polygon, Avalanche, still trying to bounce back. So again, the fact that Hedera's DeFi market started to really kind of break out back in March 2024, and then of course back in January and February. And now we're starting kind of just trail a little bit in a downtrend, waiting for DeFi to wake back up. I do think that the DeFi side of Hedera is going to have a much larger push to the upside, especially because of the efficiencies and with what Hedera is now focused on, which is of course institutional DeFi. So again, with a lot of these recent launches, with a lot of the building happening around the DeFi side from specific protocols like Bonzo Finance, I do expect the DeFi side of Hedera to really wake up. Now also on top of that, tokenization. So we have been tracking tokenization on Hedera for quite some time. Currently on RBA.xyz, there is 26 RWAs tied back to Hedera. A lot of this is tokenized real estate actually coming from Red Swan. We also have a few stable coins. Let's just go to asset class real quick. So a ton of US Treasuries coming from ARKX. We also have Akayo, and then of course stable coins. We have 3 stable coins. One coming from Straits X Singapore dollar, the Australian digital dollar, and then also USDC. And then outside of that, we have a ton of real estate. Then we have private credit as well. Non-US government debts also coming from ARKX, and then Kyle as well with institutional funds, and then Diamond Standard as well. So again, there's a lot of RBAs on Hedera. We're just waiting for the value to be tracked. RBA. XYZ seems to still be adding a lot of tokenized assets. And again, we love to see well over 20 plus RWAs. Right now, this is saying 32 in terms of the results. So it's hard to say exactly how many RWAs we have tied back to Hedera. You to remember that Hedera has been tokenizing for well over 3+ years now. So I would imagine that the RWA count is probably significantly higher than 26 or even, going down here 32. And I could just imagine the amounts of money that is tied back to Hedera as well, in terms of tokenized RWAs. Now talking about that, let's address a few things that have been happening around Hedera. Hedera actually recently put out a great post regarding October because again, the months seem to kind of be just going by so fast. But we also start to see in these months more and more updates, more and more expansions happening. And Hedera is recording some of the largest months in history around the ecosystem, around major expansions, major updates, things like that. And I think that this is very important to focus on at this moment in the space while our prices are still kind of dragging down. They're still kind of just going sideways. Nothing's really happening in terms of price action. Most people would argue that the space has been pretty negative over the last couple months. I would argue the last almost 10 months for a lot of these projects because again with Hedera the last high was back in January. So it's been 10 months since we made a new high on this chart, and that's where we start to see that peak negativity happening in this space. But during this time we are seeing months like for example October where we did see another groundbreaking month for institutional grade. And what this is just saying for the Hedera network, that's institutional grade. But we have from an HBAR ETF listing and network staking boost to agentic DeFi and verifiable AI for governments and enterprises. Let's dive in. So right off the rip, we do have of course the Canary Funds HBAR ETF. This was a big one. This got listed on the US stock market, which was a monumental achievement for the industry as a whole, as the third cryptocurrency to get a listing after only Bitcoin and Ethereum. The networks and institutional grade differentiators shown through. And then also on top of that, the HBAR ETF launch was not in isolation, but against the backdrop of another large announcement. As we continue to drive both institutional and retail adoption of Hedera, we sent an additional 250 million HBAR to the native Hedera staking account, which also got announced